At first light, the Roman legion came up the last feet of the ramp, braced to kill, and found no one to kill. 960 people lay dead inside the fortress on the rock, and not one of them had been killed by Rome. This is Masada, in the Judean desert, in the spring of the year 73, or 74. The manuscripts of the only man who tells this story disagree, and I have learned to begin with that disagreement rather than hide it. No archers on the parapet, no oil heating in the cauldrons, no defiant shout from the men who had held this place against the whole weight of the empire, held it under a leader named Eleazar ben Yair, who had made them a promise about how this would end. Only smoke, rising thin and straight in the cold morning air, and silence. The kind of silence that has weight. They had come to storm a fortress. They walked into a tomb. 960. That is the number the Chronicle gives for the dead inside the walls of Masada that morning. Men, women, and children, almost the entire population of the rock, lying where they had been laid out in the dark hours before the legion came. Not killed by Rome, killed, the source says, by themselves and by each other, in a sequence so deliberate that the last man alive set fire to the palace, fell on his own sword, and left the legion the emptiest victory in its history. This is the story of a siege that the besiegers won completely and lost utterly, of an army that built one of the great engineering works of the ancient world to take a mountain, and took it only to discover that the enemy had already left through a door the legion could not follow. Our single witness is Flavius Josephus, writing in the Jewish War, Book 7. He was not there. He was in Rome by then, a captured Jewish commander turned client of the emperors who had destroyed his nation, writing for a Roman audience in Greek. Everything we think we know about what happened on this rock comes through one man with reasons to shape it. Keep that close. We will need it at the end. What Josephus describes is this. The defenders were Sicarii, and I will come back to who they were, because the name matters more than it looks. When their leader understood the ramp would carry the legion over the wall the next morning, he gathered them and argued, against every instinct a living thing has, that they should die by their own hands rather than by Rome's. Most of the food in the storerooms was left untouched, piled and visible, and Josephus is careful to tell us why it was left, so that the Romans, when they came, would understand that these people had not been starved into the grave. They had chosen it. That detail is doing work. Hold on to the full storerooms. We come back to them. I read this passage 3 times before I noticed what it is not saying. It does not say Josephus heard it from a Roman soldier. It says the whole account was carried out of the fortress by 2 women and 5 children, who hid in the water channels underground while the others died, and who were brought out to tell the legion, and through the legion, eventually Josephus, exactly what had been decided and said. One source, 2 witnesses, both terrified, both children or women, in a culture that would not have weighted their testimony heavily, and a historian in Rome, assembling it years later into 2 of the most polished speeches in ancient literature. We will weigh that, not yet. There is one more thing the legion found, or that the spades of a much later century found, scattered in the dust of a single chamber. A small cluster of broken pottery fragments, 11 of them, or 12, the excavators never quite agreed, each scratched with a name. The ancient world wrote on broken pots the way we write on the backs of envelopes. Ostraca, the cheapest paper there was. A handful of names on a handful of sherds in one place. Josephus says the men drew lots to decide who would kill the rest, and then the last few drew lots again for who would be the final hand. Lots, in the ancient world, were often marked sherds. The camera of history keeps returning to that little pile of clay, and we will return to it too, because it is either the most chilling physical confirmation of a written account that we possess from antiquity, or it is nothing of the kind, and a great deal depends on which. The man who commanded the legion that climbed the ramp was Lucius Flavius Silva, governor of the province of Judea, legate of the 10th legion, the Fretensis, the legion of the Strait, the one that had helped break Jerusalem 3 years before and stamped its boar and its galley on the bricks it baked across the country. We know less about Silva than we would like. He was a careful man, the kind Rome sent to finish things rather than start them, the kind who does not gamble on a storm of the walls, when the alternative is to spend a winter moving the desert itself one basket at a time until the mountain has a staircase. Patience was his weapon. By Josephus's count, he had with him the better part of a legion and thousands of Jewish prisoners to carry the earth. And that, too, is a detail with a sting in it. That the ramp-up Masada may have been built by the hands of the very people the fortress was meant to defend. Against him, on the rock, perhaps 960 souls, fighters and their families. Not an army, a community with knives. To understand why a Roman governor brought a legion across 100 miles of dry country to besiege a community with knives, and why that community chose what it chose rather than face him, you have to go back 3 years, to a burning city, and further back still to a kind of man the Romans had a special word for, and a special fear of. You have to understand what the Sicarii were, and what they had already done, and what was waiting for them if the ramp reached the top. A short blade. That is where it starts. Not on a mountain, but in a crowd, in Jerusalem, in the years before the war, where a man would press close to another in the press of a festival throng, slide a curved dagger out from under his cloak, open his neighbor's throat, and then turn and cry out in horror with everyone else as the body fell. The Romans called the dagger a sica. They called the men who carried it the Sicarii, the daggermen. It is the first recorded urban assassination campaign in Western history, and it was aimed not at Romans, but at other Jews, the priests, the landowners, the moderates who counseled accommodation with Rome. The Sicarii did not want peace. They believed peace with Rome was a sin against God, who alone was their ruler. And they killed the men who disagreed in the most public way they could find. Their founder's name reaches back 2 generations before Masada, to Judas the Galilean, who had raised a revolt against a Roman tax census when Judea first came under direct rule. The movement he began held that paying tribute to a mortal emperor was idolatry, that the only Lord of Israel was God, and that death was preferable to the admission of any other master. Eleazar ben Yair, the man who would command on the rock, was of that creed, and a descendant of that founding line, Josephus says, though Josephus is the only one who says it. Remember the creed. Everything that happens at the end of this story is already contained in it. A man who believes that submission is the one unforgivable thing has, in a sense, decided how he will die long before anyone offers him the choice. To understand the rock itself, you have to go back further, to a king who was dead by the time any Sicarius was born. Herod the Great, client king of Judea, builder, paranoiac, had fortified Masada 3/4 of a century earlier as a refuge against 2 fears at once, his own restless subjects and Cleopatra of Egypt, who he was convinced would ask Mark Antony for his kingdom. So Herod took a diamond-shaped plateau of bare rock, 1,300 feet above the western shore of the Dead Sea, sheer on every side, and he turned it into the most extravagant bolt hole in the ancient world. A palace cascading in 3 terraces down the sheer northern face, where the air is cooler. Bathhouses with heated floors. And storerooms, long ranks of them, and great cisterns cut into the rock to catch the flash floods of the rare desert rains. Enough water and grain and wine and oil to keep a garrison alive for years on a mountain where nothing grows. He ringed the summit with a wall built in the casemate style, not one thick rampart, but 2 parallel walls, with the gap between them divided into chambers, rooms inside the fortification itself. Hold that detail. A wall that is also a row of rooms, packed earth and timber and stone, is a different thing to break than a single face of masonry. And 3 years into the future, on the night the ram came up the ramp, the difference between those 2 kinds of wall would decide everything. Herod died. The fortress passed to Rome, and a small Roman garrison sat on the rock through the quiet decades, guarding nothing in particular, drinking Herod's cisterns dry one winter at a time. Then, in the year 66, the whole of Judea rose against Rome. It began over money and sacrilege and the contempt of a procurator, and it became the war that would define the reign of an entire Roman dynasty. Early in the revolt, a band of Sicarii under Eleazar's leadership went up to Masada, took the Roman garrison by surprise. Josephus says by stratagem, and is vague, as he is whenever the Sicarii do something that might look like courage, and killed them and held the rock. From that eagle's perch, they raided the surrounding country. And here's the part of their record that Josephus will not let his readers forget. At a village called Ein-Gedi, on a feast day, the Sicarii of Masada fell on their own people and killed 700 Jewish women and children, by Josephus's count. Our only source for Masada despises the men who died there. That is a thing you must hold in both hands at once, the heroism of the ending and the slaughter at Ein-Gedi, because the man telling you both wants you to feel only one of them. The war ground on. Vespasian was sent to crush it, and was halfway through when the Emperor Nero died and the empire convulsed into civil war. Vespasian left for Rome to become emperor himself, and handed the Judean command to his son Titus. In the late summer of the year 70, after a siege of horror that I will not unspool here because it deserves its own telling, Titus took Jerusalem and burned the temple. The smoke of it, Josephus says, could be seen for miles. With the city gone and the temple ash, the revolt was effectively over. Effectively. There were still 3 desert fortresses flying the rebel banner, and one by one Rome reduced them until only Masada was left, the highest, the driest, the strongest, and the last. If the chronicles and the small daily decisions of provincial governors are the kind of thing that holds you, the way a war is not ended by its great battle, but by the slow mopping up that historians skip, then this is the work this channel keeps doing, and there is more of it waiting. Back to the rock. Sometime around the year 72 or 73, the date floats, as everything about this siege floats, Lucius Flavius Silva marched the 10th Legion Fretensis and its auxiliaries and its long train of Jewish prisoners down from the Judean hills to the floor of the desert and looked up at Masada. What he saw would have told a less patient man that the place could not be taken. 1,300 feet of cliff. One narrow, twisting path up the eastern face that Josephus calls the snake, so steep a single defender could hold it. Water and food on the summit for years, and the campaigning season is short in that furnace of a valley. Silva did not try the snake path. He did what Rome did better than any power before it. He made the siege a problem of engineering and labor rather than courage. First, a wall of circumvallation, running all the way around the base of the mountain, nearly 4 kilometers of it, with watchtowers, so that not one person could slip off the rock in the dark. You can still trace it in the desert today. Then 8 camps for his men, set against that wall, their outlines still scratched into the hillside after 19 centuries, the clearest surviving Roman siege works anywhere on earth. He had sealed the mountain. Now he had to climb it. On the western side, a natural spur of white rock, the Romans and the locals called it the Luke, the White Rock, rose partway up the cliff, a ready-made foundation. Against it, basket by basket, prisoner by prisoner, the legion began to build a ramp of earth and stone and timber out of the desert floor, up the spur, toward the wall at the summit. Day after day in the heat, the ramp grew. The defenders on the parapet watched it rise toward them, a little higher each evening, and there was nothing they could do to stop it, because to stop it, they would have had to come down, and to come down was to die. They could only watch the staircase being built to their door, and count the days, and decide, slowly, through a winter, with the thing growing taller every dawn, what they would do when it reached the top. Picture Silva the evening before, because the chronicle does not, and the silence is its own kind of evidence. The ramp is nearly finished. A patient man stands at the foot of his own staircase and looks up at a fortress that has cost him a wall, 8 camps, a winter, and the sweat of thousands. And he knows that tomorrow it ends. He does not know how. That is the thing the legate cannot see from below. He is thinking about the assault, the casualties on the climb, the prisoners he will take. He is thinking like a soldier. The men at the top of the rock have stopped thinking like soldiers some time ago. On the ramp, the legion set an ironclad siege tower, and inside it a battering ram, and they pushed the whole apparatus up the made slope until the ram could reach the wall. And the wall came down. Stone is brittle. A ram finds its rhythm, and a masonry face cracks and falls, and the legionaries would have felt the old grim satisfaction of it, the breach opening, the way in. And then they looked through the gap and saw that behind the broken stone there was a second wall, and that this one was not going to fall. This is the casemate construction, doing the one thing it was built to do. The defenders, watching the ramp climb all winter, had thrown up an inner wall in the cleverest way they could. Two parallel rows of timber packed solid with earth between them. When the ram struck it, the timber gave a little, and the earth shifted and absorbed the blow, and the harder the ram drove, the more tightly the earth compacted. You cannot batter down a cushion. Every Roman engineer on that ramp understood at once that they had met a wall their best machine made stronger with every stroke. So Silva ordered fire, torches against the timber, and the wood caught, and the flames ran along the inner wall, and then the wind on the mountain, which blows hard up there in the late afternoon off the Dead Sea, turned. Josephus says it swung around and drove the fire back down the ramp toward the Romans, toward their own tower, and for a moment it looked as though the legion had set light to its own siege. The men must have thought, in that gust, that God was on the rock after all. Then the wind shifted again, back the way it had come, and now the flames bit into the earth and timber wall from the right side and ate it. And by evening the inner wall was a line of embers,